Hey guys, tonight we're diving headfirst into the most Victorian story never told in your high school textbook, the tale of women, tea, and the kind of over-the-counter opium that would make even your aunt's secret wine stash look like child's play. That's right. Why almost every Victorian woman was addicted to opium. So, before you drift off into a gentle laudanum haze, or, just actual sleep, take a second to like the video and subscribe. But only if you actually enjoy this kind of thing. Drop a comment letting me know your favorite old-timey home remedy and what time you're listening from. Now, dim those lights, put a fan on for that sweet Victorian draft, and settle in with your most questionable nightcap. Maybe tuck in your toes, so the ghosts of judgmental pharmacists can't nibble at your 19th century morals. Let's get curious for a second. Have you ever wondered, why did Victorian ladies get their medicine from the same place as their favorite painter? Was every fainting spell just a side effect, or was it just Tuesday? Did anyone ever read a medical label before chugging a bottle labeled soothing syrup? Could you survive an era where the cure for anxiety, toothaches, and nervous complaints was a casual teaspoon of opium in your morning tea? And how did anyone function with a medicine cabinet more dangerous than the contents of a modern festival porta potty? And now, congratulations. You've just woken up in 1854 London. There's fog in your lungs, lace around your neck, and a bottle of laudanum in your bedside drawer. Good luck. It's the middle of the 19th century, and you live in a world where just take some opium is as common as have you tried turning it off and on again. Victorians put opium in everything from cough syrup to candy. The real miracle is that anyone remembered their own name. Let's set the scene. You wake up in a world where the air outside your window is a combination of coal, smoke, horse manure, and the faint whiff of your neighbor's attempts at boiled cabbage. The city never really sleeps, it just lies down and vibrates gently. Thanks to an average noise level of approximately 1 million children and the constant rattle of carriage wheels on cobblestone, there's a relentless ache in your temples, part hangover, part existential dread, part mystery. The solution? It's not coffee. It's not even tea. It's opium. Straight from your medicine cabinet. And probably in your toothpaste too. You shuffle over to the mantelpiece, where the family medicine bottles stand in a proud row, each promising to cure whatever's wrong with you, even if what's wrong with you is just being alive in 1854. Laudanum, Godfrey's cordial, Dover's powder, Batley's sedative solution, each with a taste like burnt sugar and regret, and each ready to numb you right back to basic factory settings. And it's not just for you. Your entire household is dosing themselves in the name of health, hygiene, and polite society. Your toddler has a cough? Time for a syrup that's 1 part molasses, 2 parts morphine, and 1 part please let me sleep tonight. The old folks down the hall, they take their opium as tonic drops, which sound almost innocent until you realize Grandpa hasn't blinked since Tuesday. Even the dog gets a bit if he's looking too excitable. This is a culture where the poppy is more than just a flower, it's a way of life. Opium is woven through your daily routine like background noise. The Victorian equivalent of holding in a sneeze until you burst a blood vessel. You hear about the dangers now and then, a minister warning about the poppy fiend in a magazine, or a neighbor's cousin who disappeared into an opium den and came out speaking fluent poetry. But it all feels distant, theoretical. After all, everyone you know is doing it. And they seem fine, except for the occasional tendency to stare blankly at the wallpaper for 6 hours straight. And the stuff is everywhere. Pharmacies display great glass jars of the stuff, colored with swirling labels and handwritten promises of relief for every ailment. The apothecary is basically the Victorian version of a convenience store. If every product at 7-Eleven could both cure and cause constipation, you buy your opium syrup alongside your licorice and candied ginger, maybe with a dash of peppermint for after dinner. Even advertisements in the newspaper are soothing. A blessing for mothers. A gentle tonic for all, with only a small note about possible side effects like gentle sleep and, very occasionally, death. What does it feel like to live in a nation this blissfully sedated? For one, nobody moves quickly, except for the undertakers. Everyone seems just a little bit detached, floating through foggy streets with a vague smile and an even vaguer idea of where they're going. Social awkwardness? Numbed. Toothaches? Numbed. The gnawing realization that your hat is made of dead beaver? Also mercifully numb. Of course, there are some drawbacks. Occasionally, people forget basic details like their own address, or the fact that they just fed the baby 3 times in 1 hour. There's a reason Victorian diaries are full of blank pages and sentimental poetry about clouds of feeling. If you're feeling blue, or angry, or just a little bit human, there's a remedy waiting for you at the bottom of a bottle labeled Soothing Elixir. But in the end, nobody seems to mind. There are bigger problems. Cholera, poverty, political scandal, and dresses so heavy they could anchor a small boat. Opium is just the background music to a society that desperately wants to take the edge off, 1 teaspoon at a time. It's not a vice, it's not even a problem, it's just Tuesday. And so, you step out into the swirling fog, half awake, half dreaming, and you join an entire nation floating gently through history, blissfully, comfortably, almost miraculously numb. If you're a woman in Victorian England, you are contractually obligated to develop a mysterious nervous condition by the age of 22. Luckily, society has a cure, a prescription for quiet suffering, decorative fainting, and enough laudanum to tranquilize a horse. Let's begin with the basics. The year is 1861. You, a woman of good breeding and slightly worse luck, awaken in a room so frilly it could give a migraine to a French pastry chef. Sunlight streams politely through lace curtains, illuminating your daily companions. A fainting couch upholstered in chintz, 3 nervous potted ferns, and a small side table holding the twin pillars of Victorian medicine, smelling salts and a brown bottle labelled for hysteria. Take liberally. You feel strange, anxious perhaps, maybe a touch of sadness, a sprinkle of boredom, a dash of existential dread. In modern times you'd call it burnout. Here it's just called being a woman. Your heart races, your hands tremble. Did you just think an independent thought? Careful, that's grounds for a doctor's visit. The doctor arrives, mustache perfectly waxed, with an air of weary authority. He checks your pulse, too fast, your pupils, too dreamy, and your willingness to sit quietly and agree with him, never fast enough. His diagnosis is as inevitable as it is vague. Neurasthenia, hysteria, nervous prostration, or simply the female malady. In Victorian England, if a man has an opinion, it's wisdom. If a woman has an emotion, it's pathology. The solution, naturally, is rest. Not the kind of rest where you're left alone to enjoy a book and a biscuit, no. This is medical rest. You're banished to the fainting couch, which is both a piece of furniture and a lifestyle. Your job is to recline gracefully, flutter your eyelids, and wait for society to decide you are better, which may be never. For the ambitious, there is always the chance to faint dramatically at dinner, preferably landing near a wealthy bachelor or a decorative aspidistra. It's the original Victorian power move. And when rest isn't enough, enter laudanum, the original multitasking miracle. 1 teaspoon and your nerves are soothed, your headaches dulled, your existential questions whisked away on a tide of poppy-scented contentment. Suddenly, It's much easier to survive a day of embroidery, forced piano practice, and your mother-in-law's opinions on the correct number of pleats in a morning dress. Laudanum turns every slight, every anxiety, every passing mood into a soft golden haze. It also helps if your corset is 2 sizes too small and you haven't been allowed to walk faster than a gentle waddle since you were 16. Society watches you with a critical eye. Are you too pale? Opium. Too energetic? Opium. Slightly unenthusiastic about your third cousin's watercolor exhibition? Probably hysteria. Better double the dose. In fact, the only thing worse than being an obviously ill woman in Victorian England is being a suspiciously healthy one. If you can't swoon on command, people start to wonder if you're entirely trustworthy. You might even be accused of having opinions. Through it all, your fainting couch becomes command central. Your friends visit, clutching their own bottles of soothing syrup and sharing gossip about Lady Penelope, who fainted during church and was revived only by the promise of a new hat. There's a constant, unspoken competition. Who can be the most gracefully afflicted, the most decoratively languid? The fainting couch economy is booming. Part performance art, part group therapy, and part side effect. Meanwhile, men float through your life as physicians, husbands, and apothecaries, all convinced they know exactly what you need. Less thinking, more lying down, and the occasional sedative to keep things peaceful. Your actual needs, a sense of purpose, meaningful conversation, basic autonomy, are dismissed as symptoms to be managed. The solution, conveniently, always fits inside a bottle. Of course, there are dangers to this dreamy existence. Some women don't wake up from their afternoon nap, or find themselves unable to remember which city they're in. Withdrawal is a private crisis, spoken about in whispers and quickly covered with another, stronger prescription. But the cycle continues, because it is easier for everyone if you remain a little bit sick, a little bit sleepy, and not too interested in voting. You settle into your ornate but wildly uncomfortable bed, surrounded by lace, antimacassars, and the unmistakable scent of floral wallpaper. On your nightstand, next to a book of sad poetry, sits a bottle of laudanum, promising sweet dreams and the occasional hallucination. This is your nightly ritual. You've survived another day of awkward social visits, repressed emotions, and having to pretend that your corset isn't actively trying to kill you. Your reward? A generous spoonful of a dark amber liquid that tastes like burnt licorice mixed with melancholy. And yet, it goes down easier than your mother-in-law's judgment. Laudanum, for the uninitiated, is what happens when the 19th century tries to do self-care. Equal parts alcohol and opium. It's a bottle of yes, please. You don't ask questions about ingredients. You don't check the dose. You just pour, swallow, and let it do its thing. It's cheaper than a doctor, easier than meditation, and doesn't require you to make eye contact with your husband. Within minutes, your bones begin to soften, the stiffness in your back fades, your thoughts slow to a pleasantly sluggish crawl, and the relentless pressure of Victorian womanhood melts away like a frosted cake left out in the Sunday. You can finally breathe, mostly because you've loosened your corset by 2 scandalous notches and told the maid you're not to be disturbed unless the house is literally on fire. Outside your window, gaslights flicker like tired fireflies and the sound of hoofbeats echoes through cobbled streets. But inside your bedroom, you're floating. Not in any metaphorical way. You're genuinely not sure where the ceiling ends and the wallpaper begins. Your book lies open to a poem about death and longing, but you've forgotten how reading works. The words are just little black squiggles swimming gently across the page. Lovely. It's not just you. This is the bourgeois way, the upwardly mobile and spiritually exhausted, all end their day with a dose. Men take it for gout and overwork. Women take it for everything else. Grief, hysteria, mild inconvenience, bad weather. It's the equalizer of the middle class. Whether you're mourning a lost child, a lost fortune, or just the sheer tragedy of another dinner with cold beef and silent judgment, Laudanum makes it tolerable. You've even started giving it cute names. My cordial, my tonic, my little comfort. Your friends call it sleep syrup, and none of you discuss how sometimes you don't remember entire Tuesdays. It's not polite to dwell. And besides, if you can't lean into a state of mild, graceful unconsciousness in your own bed, then really, what's the point of having middle-class respectability? Of course, no one admits it's addictive. You're not an addict. You're just tired, or fragile, or prone to what the newspapers call nerves. The word addiction implies lack of control, and that's absurd. You are the very image of control, white gloves, porcelain skin, and the ability to host a tea party while emotionally dissociating in 4 directions. And then there are the dreams. Oh, the dreams. Laudanum doesn't just send you to sleep. It drags you down a velvet-lined tunnel to a place where time bends, colors shift, and occasionally you chat with your great-aunt, who's been dead since 1842. You dream of gardens with talking roses, of floating above London rooftops, of reciting French poetry to a lobster wearing a monocle. It's all terribly cultured. When you wake up, it's usually mid-morning. The tea is lukewarm, the headache is hovering, and the world feels slightly too loud. But no matter. The bottle is still there, dutiful as ever, waiting for another evening. It asks for nothing but silence and a teaspoon. The perfect gentleman, really. Parenting is hard. Parenting in the 1800s means your main tools are patience, prayer, and Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup, a blend of sugar, opium, and denial. Teething, colic, existential dread? There's a syrup for that. It's 1872. You've been awake for what feels like several centuries. The baby has been crying since yesterday, or possibly since birth. Time has lost all meaning. Your husband is working, which is Victorian for reading the newspaper very slowly in another room. The house smells like boiled wool, burnt porridge, and a vague aura of moral disappointment. You reach for the bottle without hesitation. There it is, glinting in the morning light like a tiny amber miracle. Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup. The label reads like poetry, guaranteed to pacify the most irritable child. No mention of the opium, of course. Why spoil the magic? 1 spoonful, and within minutes, your shrieking infant transforms into a serene, slightly glassy-eyed cherub. No more colic. No more teething pain, no more screaming that echoes off the walls and into your soul. Just peaceful, blissful silence. You could weep with gratitude, but you're too tired to form tears. Victorian parenting is not about thriving. It's about surviving. There are no mummy blogs, no gentle parenting influencers, no Pinterest boards for nutritious organic purees. You're not steaming kale. You're lucky if the porridge doesn't have soot in it. Your child's diet is 40% bread, 40% guesswork, and 20% medicinal narcotics cleverly disguised as candy. Discipline? If the child can walk, they can work. If they can cry, they can be quieted. With a syrup, a tonic, or a firm Victorian sigh. Your goal isn't to raise emotionally balanced future adults. Your goal is to avoid having your neighbor suggest that your child is overly spirited, which is code for annoying and also code for your fault. There are entire generations being raised in an opium haze so thick, you're not entirely sure they even know what reality is supposed to feel like. And honestly, that's the dream. The alternative is a daily battle of wills, where you're outnumbered, outslept, and deeply outmatched by a 2-foot-tall person with no teeth and infinite stamina. And it's not just the Winslows. There's Godfrey's Cordial, Dalby's Carminative, Atkinson's Infant Preservative, each bottle more soothing than the last, each one a mild war crime by modern standards. But no one questions it. If the baby's not crying, that means it's working. If they nap for 5 hours straight and wake up briefly to stare into space, also working. Sometimes, in the quiet, you catch yourself wondering what exactly is in that syrup. You read the back of the bottle. Sugar, morphine, water. You nod thoughtfully, as though that somehow justifies giving it to a toddler. You try not to think about dosage. Nobody's really sure what a pinch or a dram is anyway. You've settled on a spoon that feels right, which is either maternal intuition or very slow manslaughter. But before you judge too harshly, remember the alternative. There are no noise-cancelling headphones, no baby monitors, no pediatricians who recommend tummy time and fiber. If your baby has a fever, you're told to rub mustard on their feet and hang a potato around their neck. If that doesn't work, you're supposed to pray and accept that God has mysterious plans. So yes, you're giving them opium, because frankly, it's the only thing that actually works. And truthfully, you're not just giving it to them for their sake. You need rest. You need peace. You need one blessed minute without the sound of screaming reverberating through your spine. You're not a bad parent. You're just a very tired one. Living in a time where the medical advice is don't worry. This syrup is widely endorsed by the American Medical Association, which is the 19th century equivalent of it, has good Amazon reviews. So you tuck your peacefully drooling child into their cradle. You straighten your skirts, rinse the spoon, and whisper a quiet thanks to Mrs. Winslow, patron saint of barely coping. Tomorrow, you'll face more teething, more tantrums, more chaos. But tonight, you sleep. The syrup has done its job. Nothing says civilized society like a strong cup of tea. And if you're feeling a little too awake, just add a dash of tincture of opium. It's the original pumpkin spice, only slightly more addictive. It's 4 o'clock in Victorian England, a sacred hour when all respectable members of the bourgeoisie pause whatever dreadful thing they were doing, embroidering handkerchiefs, publicly pretending to enjoy mutton, or repressing a feeling to sit down and have tea. This is no mere beverage, it's a ritual, a ceremony, a national performance of delicate cups, biscuits, and polite silence punctuated by faint judgment. But if you think it's just tea and cucumber sandwiches, think again, because hiding beneath that dainty floral china is a national coping mechanism, a quiet swirl of opium tincture stirred into the bottom of your cup like it's honey. But instead of sweetening your drink, it removes your will to yell at your children. You pour the tea, imported from China by way of some fairly alarming imperial arrangements. The leaves are strong, the water questionably boiled, and the sugar costs more than your maid's monthly wages. But none of that matters, because you're about to take the edge off your day with a few calming drops from a dark little bottle with a cork that smells faintly of regret. The opium dissolves quickly, with the faintest tint of bitterness. It pairs beautifully with the Earl Grey, and within minutes your mood smooths out like a freshly ironed tablecloth. You are no longer mildly irritated by the weather, your sister-in-law's unsolicited opinions, or the existential futility of being a woman with a pulse in Victorian society. Instead, you are pleasantly foggy, as if someone dimmed the lights on your brain. Everyone does it. The trend started quietly among the wealthier classes, ladies with too many thoughts and not enough rights. But it soon trickled down through society, until even the vicar's wife was sipping her way through sermons with the help of a tincture called Reverend Hope's Gentle Drops. Some claimed it helped them focus on scripture, others just liked how clouds looked afterwards. Tea becomes less about hydration and more about sedation. The drawing room, once a place for anxious conversation and repressed sighs, is now a cozy nest of numbed chatter and the occasional slow-motion giggle. Your guests compliment the biscuits. You have no memory of baking them. You're pretty sure you didn't. But somehow, everything feels nice. Of course, you don't talk about the opium. It's not polite. You say you've added a little something to your tea. And everyone nods knowingly, while maintaining eye contact with the wallpaper. It's not scandalous. It's sophisticated. You're not an addict. You're delicate. You're not sedating yourself. You're refining your nerves. It's Victorian branding at its finest. There are dangers, of course. You sometimes forget what day it is, or find yourself starting a sentence that never ends. Once, you read the same page of a book 7 times before realizing you are holding it upside down. But the alternative is feeling all your feelings. And no thank you. And when you're having company, especially that one friend who always smells like lavender and disappointment, you might double the pate dose. Suddenly, her endless stories about her cat's indigestion become tolerable, almost interesting. You nod along, eyes slightly glazed, and think, this is what peace must feel like. You'll forget the entire conversation in 20 minutes, but that's not really a problem. As the sun sets and the shadows stretch across the sitting room, your tea things are quietly gathered by a maid who's already seen too much. You lean back, draped across a chaise longue like a wilted flower in a Gainsborough painting, and exhale a sigh that smells faintly of bergamot and terrible decisions. It's tea time, and once again you've survived the day with the help of Queen Victoria's 2 favorite companions, caffeine and narcotics. The empire may be expanding, but your awareness is gently shrinking. You've earned it. The Victorian pharmacy is a magical place where you can buy anything except actual good advice. Shelves brim with miracle cures, all laced with enough narcotics to fuel a Rolling Stones tour. You push open the door of the apothecary and step into a world that smells like menthol, burnt sugar, and questionable ethics. A small bell rings as you enter, a polite little chime that says, "Welcome to your next medical adventure." Please abandon common sense at the door. The shelves are stacked to the ceiling with glass bottles, tins, and jars labeled with elaborate calligraphy and alarming promises. Revive the blood, strengthen the nerves, reawaken the spirit. Without death. It's unclear if these are medications or song titles, but either way, they'll be yours for the right price. The apothecary himself is a man with an impressively curled moustache, and the quiet intensity of someone who once prescribed arsenic for a rash and never apologized. He doesn't need a license, he has confidence. And confidence, in Victorian England, is 90% of medicine. The other 10% is mostly alcohol, morphine, and powdered beetle shell. You browse the aisles. There's a cordial for digestion that smells like cloves and despair, a syrup for melancholy that promises pleasant dreams and includes a highly recommended serving size of just enough to forget. There are pills for liver congestion, womb irritation, spontaneous teeth pain, and something mysteriously called a general feeling of wrongness. You pick up a bottle labeled Dr. Scroggin's Essence of Rest, which features a picture of a woman reclining peacefully while 3 children sit frozen around her like obedient taxidermy. The ingredients include opium, chloroform, and what appears to be extract of serenity. It's unclear if that's a real plant or just the name of the doctor's daughter. The best part? No one questions you. You don't need a prescription. You don't even need a reason. You simply say you're feeling unsettled and suddenly you're walking out with enough chemical assistance to knock out a Victorian circus elephant. Bonus. The bottle is beautiful. Cobalt blue, with an embossed image of a mermaid seductively holding a poppy. It's medicine and home decor. Everything is marketed with the calm reassurance of a time before regulation. No one has yet invented side effect warnings, so there's nothing to ruin your day by suggesting death, organ failure, or waking up in a field without trousers. Instead, you're told that the elixir of tranquility has been trusted by mothers, endorsed by scholars, and approved by at least one duchess. Of course, half the people you know are already frequent customers. Your neighbor swears by her tonic for lady nerves, which may or may not be responsible for the fact that she hasn't blinked since March. Your cousin's children are curiously well behaved, thanks to a nighttime syrup that renders them pleasantly immobile. And your husband has discovered a new energy elixir that makes him invincible between the hours of 9:15 and 9:30 a.m., after which he collapses and demands mutton. Every bottle has a prude story. Every powder has a promise. Some are imported from the far corners of the empire, containing rare and exotic ingredients like Jamaican bark, East Indian root, and essence of suspicious colonialism. Others are concocted locally by men with names like Horace or Edwin, working out of small sheds that occasionally explode. And while the remedies themselves are unpredictable at best, ineffective at worst, they feel like progress. They give you hope in a bottle. Control in a chaotic world. A moment of placebo-powered peace in a time when most medical interventions involve leeches and the phrase, "We'll see if it gets worse." So you clutch your little bag of unregulated optimism and head home, comforted by the knowledge that somewhere between the opium drops, the cocaine-laced toothache cream, and the powdered rhubarb lies the answer to your ailments, or at least the temporary illusion of one. Either way, you're calling that a win. Pale skin, fragile nerves, and dark circles under your eyes aren't just beauty trends, they're opium's signature look. You might feel like death, but at least you look like a pre-Raphaelite painting. You lie in your drawing room, draped in a velvet chair like a wilting orchid in an overgrown conservatory. The light is dim, the wallpaper aggressively floral, and somewhere in the distance, a piano plays a melody so slow it's practically horizontal. You haven't eaten in days, except for one biscuit and a spoonful of laudanum. The biscuit was a mistake. It's the 1860s, and you're fashionable. Not fun fashionable, medically concerning fashionable. You've cultivated a look best described as ethereal consumption chic. Society doesn't just tolerate your faintness, it applauds it. If you appear lively or well-rested, people worry you might be low-born. Or worse, healthy. You check your reflection in the mirror. Your skin is a delicate shade of alabaster, which is to say, you haven't seen the sun since Napoleon was relevant. Your eyes are rimmed with shadows that hint at both mystery and poor circulation. Your lips are pale, your hands tremble slightly, and you are precisely the type of woman painters love and physicians fear. In short, you are thriving in a very slow, softly decaying kind of way. Opium is not just your medicine, it's your aesthetic. You take a small sip from a delicately labeled bottle of restorative elixir, which contains roughly the same amount of narcotics as a modern music festival. It dulls the edges of your day, smoothing your emotions into something soft, shapeless, and terribly on-trend. You aren't alone. Across parlors and sitting rooms, other women like you are cultivating their fragility like it's a prized houseplant. A tremble of the hand, a quiet sigh, a poetic cough. Illness is, quite literally, fashionable. Magazines print articles on the beauty of melancholy. Novelists swoon over heroines who look like they've been emotionally concussed by the wind. The men don't get it, of course. They recommend fresh air, walking, maybe a bracing splash of cold water. But they also compliment your pallor and say things like, "She has the soul of a tragic poem." So really, they're part of the problem. There's pressure to perform your suffering correctly. If you weep, it must be silent and artistic. If you collapse, make sure you land near something expensive. And whatever you do, don't get better. Health is so middle class. Fashion houses start designing clothes around the invalid look. High necklines to exaggerate the neck's fragility. Flowing sleeves to hide the occasional muscle spasm. Corsets tightened just enough to encourage breathlessness, but not so tight that you can't whisper something mournful over a cup of weak tea. And don't forget the hair. You've stopped brushing it regularly because effort is so pre-industrial. Instead, you let it fall in soft, wild waves. Romantic chaos that says, "I haven't slept in a week, and I wrote a sad poem about it." But of course, this is all held together by opium. Your nerves aren't naturally this delicate. They've been chemically curated. Every feeling you once had, anger, joy, the need to stand upright, is now muted into something vaguely artistic. You've become your own still life, quietly reclining beneath a haze of poppy-fueled elegance. The downside? Occasionally you forget what day it is, or what season. Once you forgot how to use a spoon. But no matter, that's all part of the look. Doctors begin to worry. Not about the opium, but that you've become too distant, too cool, too modern. They suggest you try horseback riding. You stare blankly, as though they've asked you to wrestle a bear. And while some whisper that the whole aesthetic might be slowly killing you, you smile faintly, sip your syrup, and say something vague about longing. Because in a world where strength is unbecoming and enthusiasm is uncouth, fragility is your power. You may not feel anything anymore, but you look gorgeous doing it. So you rest your head against a silk cushion, your eyes half closed, your breath as slow as your metabolism, and in the fading light of the drawing room, you become what every fashionable woman dreams of. A portrait of delicate decline, framed in velvet and entirely unbothered. You feel anxious, sad, or just bored out of your mind? Congratulations, you have hysteria. Your prescription: less fresh air, fewer opinions, and more laudanum. It's like a spa day, but with more unconsciousness. The diagnosis is swift and inevitable. You sighed too loudly during breakfast? Hysteria. You cried at the opera? Hysteria. You accidentally formed a coherent thought about your own future? Major hysteria. In Victorian England, emotional regulation is not expected of you. It's actively discouraged, and any deviation from polite, half-smiling docility is chalked up to your uterus trying to stage a coup. The medical profession, consisting almost entirely of men with beards and no training in mental health, has decided that nearly every female problem, from grief to indigestion to having a bit of a day, can be neatly classified under the umbrella of hysteria. The cure, of course, is not to address your actual life, but to slowly render you incapable of caring about it. Your doctor, who once treated a cough with vinegar and a firm handshake, arrives with his usual travel kit, smelling salts, leeches, and a prescription pad that might as well just say, "Have you tried fainting?" He asks about your mood, your appetite, your dreams, but your answers don't matter. He's already writing down classic case of overstimulated femininity. The treatment plan is somehow both too much and not enough. First, you're ordered to rest. Not the fun kind of rest. No novels, no letters, no conversation. You're meant to lie in bed with your eyes closed and your soul on standby. They call it the rest cure. You call it being slowly replaced by a decorative pillow. Then comes the medicine, Laudanum, of course, the Swiss army knife of Victorian despair. It doesn't heal you so much as gently erase your ability to remember what was wrong in the first place. You're not calmer, you're just slightly hallucinating. Your thoughts float like feathers on a breeze. You're fairly certain you once had a personality. Not anymore. Now, you just vibe. If that doesn't work, and it never really does, there are more invasive options. Some physicians recommend cold water therapy, which involves being dunked in icy baths, like a criminally depressed teabag. Others favor electrotherapy, a charming little jolt to remind you that nothing in life is under your control, not even your own neurons. But the most famous treatment of all? Pelvic massage. That's right. Some doctors have come to believe that hysteria is not a mental condition at all. It's a problem of stuck reproductive energy. So you're sent to a medical professional who treats you by aggressively restoring your balance with what they refer to, with truly Olympian denial, as manual therapy. And if this makes you uncomfortable, well, guess what? That's probably more hysteria. You begin to notice something. The symptoms of hysteria seem to overlap perfectly with the symptoms of being a woman with unmet needs. Exhaustion, irritability, hopelessness, anxiety, things that might be resolved with autonomy, supportive relationships, or fewer corsets. But instead, you're told to hush, lie still, and let the tincture work its magic. You're not supposed to question the system. That's how you ended up here in the first place. Hysteria isn't just a diagnosis, it's a silencing mechanism with fancy Latin. It tells you that your emotions are inconvenient, that your intellect is problematic, that your discontent is something to be medicated rather than understood. And so, you recline on a fainting couch, your body limp, your mind adrift in an opium cloud, and you wonder, very softly, if this is really what healing looks like. Around you, the world continues. A blur of floral wallpaper, sugar cubes, and men in top hats who all seem alarmingly confident about what your uterus is thinking. You close your eyes. Not because you're tired, but because being awake in this system feels like a rebellious act. In a world without refrigeration, basic hygiene, or trustworthy plumbing, your medicine cabinet is a horror show of bottles labeled elixir, cordial, and guaranteed not to kill you, probably. Welcome to the Victorian home pharmacy. Less a collection of treatments and more a shelf of chaos in glass form. Yours is tucked behind the pantry, next to the jar of pickled onions and the emergency smelling salts. It smells faintly of licorice, vinegar, and broken promises. And it's stocked with everything from morphine to mustard powder, because in the 19th century, medicine is just a polite form of gambling. Let's take inventory. First, we have laudanum, of course, the reigning monarch of your shelf. It's opium dissolved in alcohol, which is Victorian for don't ask questions. Used for headaches, grief, toothaches, gout, restlessness, menstrual cramps, and occasionally just to make Tuesdays bearable. You've labeled it Mother's Special Syrup in elegant handwriting, as though that somehow makes it less alarming. Next to it is paregoric, a camphorated tincture of opium designed for children. That's right, children. It's advertised as soothing, gentle, and sleep-inducing, and it works like a dream. Mostly because it causes dreams. Wild, swirly ones involving talking furniture and a Victorian child flying through the ceiling. Then we have Godfrey's Cordial, a staple in every working-class household. Its exact ingredients are unknown, but it's somewhere between a sedative and a small-scale chemical weapon, often used to quiet infants, dull stomach cramps, or temporarily forget that your husband just brought home another novelty umbrella stand. There's also a bottle labeled chlorodyne, which claims to be a cure for coughs, colds, and cholera, and which contains opium, chloroform, and morphine. It's like NyQuil. If NyQuil were invented by a Victorian ghost and a loose interpretation of chemistry. 2 drops, and you're either asleep or composing abstract poetry in your head. Possibly both. And then come the bitters, which are technically digestives, but have the added bonus of being 60% alcohol and flavored like regret. You use them for stomach upset, indigestion, mild depression, and family dinners. They taste like someone dipped burnt wood in perfume, and yet somehow they're weirdly comforting. On the top shelf, you keep the showstoppers. Turlington's Balsam of Life, Daffy's Elixir, and Dr. Bateman's Pectoral Drops. Each one promises vitality, relief, and possibly immortality. None of them have expiration dates, which is helpful since no one knows when they were manufactured. Maybe last week, maybe during the Crusades. Every bottle is a mystery. The labels are cheerful. The handwriting is gorgeous. And the actual effects, somewhere between mildly helpful and accidental astral projection. But here's the thing. This is your only option. There are no modern prescriptions, no certified pharmacists, no helpful hotlines. If you're sick, you open the cabinet. If your child's coughing, you pick the syrup that sounds least explosive. If you've got anxiety, you reach for whatever hasn't already been used to polish the silverware. You keep the bottles locked up, but only out of habit. Everyone knows how to get in. Your husband has a special key hidden in the cigar box. Your children know which bottle makes bedtime funny. Even the maid has a quiet understanding with the cordial. She calls it the only reason I haven't fled to Canada. And let's be honest, the elixirs do help. Temporarily. Kind of. Pain dulls. Tears stop. Your joints feel warm. Your thoughts slow down just enough for the wallpaper to stop looking so judgmental. You know, it's not ideal. You know some of these concoctions would cause a modern-day pharmacist to drop dead from horror. But you also know that life in this era is loud, cold, and unpredictable. There's arsenic in the wallpaper, cholera in the water, and soot in the butter. If a few opium-laced tonics help you get through the week, who's judging? You wake up groggy, exhausted, and slightly terrified of the industrial smog outside. The solution? A breakfast of bread, butter, and a teaspoon of something that'll make you forget about the other 2. It's 7 a.m. in Victorian England. The fog rolling through your bedroom window smells like soot and faint regret. The milk has possibly gone off. Your chamber pot is definitely full. And you're starting the day with a mild sense of dread. Known in modern times as a case of the Mondays, and in your time as the ongoing trauma of being alive. But no worries, Victorian self-care is here to help. And it begins, like all good things, with a gentle dose of narcotics. You reach for the little brown bottle on your dresser, labelled in elegant script, Dr. Elmsworth's Morning Restorative. You've long since stopped asking what's in it. You know the drill. 1 spoonful, not too full, not too shy. It tastes like mint, molasses, and a ghost trying to apologize. Within 5 minutes, your stomach is warm, your brain has decided it's okay to be conscious, and your anxiety about the coal smoke coating your lungs has been neatly wrapped in a velvet fog of not today. Victorians love routine, and your morning ritual is the epitome of it. Wash with water that may or may not be freezing. Dress in 14 layers of emotionally repressive clothing, and consume a modest breakfast accompanied by a mind-altering substance that would be illegal in 47 countries today. Your breakfast table is a study in understated chaos. Stale bread, butter that seems to have opinions, a boiled egg staring into the void, and beside it all, your trusty bottle of laudanum, nestled in with the jam like a quiet little secret. You don't even think twice anymore. You stir a drop into your tea. Just a bit. just enough to take the edge off the realization that you have to walk 3 miles today to return a bonnet you no longer emotionally identify with. You tell yourself it's medicinal, and technically, you're right. The same way Victorian air is fresh, meaning you can't see more than 3 feet through it. Everyone takes something. Your neighbor swears by his opium bitters. Your cousin adds cocaine drops to her morning tonic. Your elderly aunt once drank a mercury solution for her complexion, and while it did give her a glow, it also gave her hallucinations of talking squirrels. But you? You're balanced. You know your dose. You're in control. You say this to yourself while sipping tea laced with the same substance that helped Queen Victoria survive a very long reign filled with a lot of men named Albert. By the time you finish breakfast, the opium has fully kicked in. Your aches have dulled. Your existential questions have packed up and left the room. You're now ready to begin the day, possibly go to the dressmaker's, write a poem you'll later burn out of embarrassment, or stare out the window, wondering if this is what fulfillment feels like. It's not. But you don't care, because now you're floating. There's a cost, of course. You've noticed your memory is soft. Conversations blur. You occasionally forget what year it is. You once called your maid mother, and she still won't make eye contact. But on the plus side, you no longer care that the neighborhood's water supply smells like boiled sadness. You're above that now, literally. You feel 6 inches taller and emotionally insulated. Victorian self-care isn't about balance or introspection. It's about survival. There's no bubble bath, no therapy, just a variety of bottled promises and the unspoken agreement that we do not talk about feelings unless they are dramatically repressed or written in rhyming couplets. And so, you pack your reticule, adjust your skirts, and step into the grey morning light with a pleasantly dulled sense of self and a vague idea of where you're supposed to be, probably somewhere that involves pretending to enjoy the company of people who name their daughters after flowers. You feel fine, not good, not bad, just fine. And in this time and place, that's considered a raging success. Doctors in the Victorian era have a prescription for every ill, and that prescription is opium. Sore throat? Opium. Melancholy? Opium. Stubbed your toe? Let's not get creative now. It's 1883, and you've come down with something vague but deeply inconvenient. Your throat is scratchy, your joints ache, and you've sneezed twice, which by Victorian standards means death is probably imminent. You summon the doctor immediately. He arrives at your home looking respectable and slightly winded, carrying a leather bag that smells faintly of mothballs, menthol, and misplaced confidence. You describe your symptoms: tiredness, a general sense of doom, and a persistent sensation that your corset may be trying to kill you. He listens intently, nods thoughtfully, and scribbles something in a notebook that might just be a sketch of a crow. Then, without hesitation, he reaches into his bag and pulls out a small bottle filled with dark, viscous liquid. Opium, he says, as if unveiling a fine wine. That should sort you out. You're not surprised. This is his answer for everything. Last month, he gave your cousin opium for indigestion. The month before that, he prescribed it to your neighbor's cat for separation anxiety. He once treated an entire church choir for spiritual fatigue using nothing but poppy syrup and a light sprinkling of cocaine. This is the golden age of the all-purpose narcotic. The medical profession hasn't yet discovered antibiotics. Germ theory is still a hot debate, and bloodletting is technically still on the table. So instead of actually curing you, your doctor will gently sedate your symptoms until you no longer care that your leg is falling off. He tells you to take 1 spoonful in the morning, 1 at night, and another as needed, a phrase which, in this case, means whenever life becomes slightly too real. He also reminds you, very seriously, not to exceed 5 spoonfuls in 1 hour unless you'd like to enter a dreamscape where you meet the ghost of your former governess and discuss wallpaper patterns. As a respectable woman of means, you follow doctor's orders to the letter. You take your dose, feel the familiar warmth creep through your limbs, and nod sagely as your headache evaporates and your desire to engage with reality gently dissolves. It's medical science, possibly witchcraft. Either way, it's working. But here's the thing, your doctor loves opium, not just as a treatment, but as a concept, as a belief system, as a lifestyle. He likely keeps a flask of it in his waistcoat for emergencies, like when patients ask difficult questions or mention menstruation. He talks about it the way modern people talk about yoga retreats or oat milk, passionately, endlessly, and with slightly unfounded confidence. In medical journals of the time, opium is hailed as a miracle. It's prescribed for tuberculosis, cholera, coughs, constipation, insomnia, marital dissatisfaction, and what's delicately referred to as female trouble. One doctor even claims it cured his gout, restored his faith in mankind, and improved the flavor of his tea. There's no stigma, no warning label, and absolutely no idea that this might not be a long-term solution. Dependency isn't really a concept yet, unless you're a lower-class addict, in which case you're just morally weak. But if you're upper middle class and pale with excellent penmanship, you're sensitive and delicate and in need of regular dosing. Soon, the opium begins to run your life. You don't plan your days around meals or outings anymore. You plan them around when you're due for another teaspoon. Your pain is still there, vaguely, like a letter you meant to reply to but can't quite read. But you don't mind. You're floating somewhere between awareness and wallpaper, and everything feels manageable. And every time you feel a little off, a headache, a missed letter, a troubling dream, you just ring for the doctor, and he returns with his leather bag of glorious, floral-scented fog. Because in Victorian England, your physician doesn't want you cured. He wants you quiet, compliant, and preferably horizontal. And as long as you're taking your tincture and not asking too many questions, you're considered the very picture of health. Victorian courtship is hard when your only hobbies are embroidery, boredom, and occasionally seeing imaginary butterflies. Luckily, your lover understands that a swoon could be love, or laudanum withdrawal. You lie on your fainting couch, one hand dramatically over your forehead, the other gripping a handkerchief embroidered with someone else's initials. It's 3 p.m., and you've received a letter sealed with wax, smelling faintly of pomade and desperation. The handwriting is elegant, if slightly unstable, and the ink is smudged in a way that suggests either heartfelt emotion or that he was writing under the influence of medicinal syrup. Odds are high. It's both. This is love, Victorian style. Whispered declarations, long glances across drawing rooms, and deeply personal poems written by someone who is quietly tripping on opiates. Emotional vulnerability is forbidden, so you channel it into metaphors involving swans, dying lilies, and the moon. You've never spoken about your feelings in plain terms. That would be ghastly. Instead, you each express affection by referencing classical mythology and gently hyperventilating. You take a sip of laudanum before reading, just a drop to settle your nerves. The words on the page soften and shimmer. You begin to read the letter aloud in a whispery voice that no one else is around to hear. He's compared your eyes to 2 storm-tossed seas, your spirit to a fragile reed, and your occasional tendency to disappear for days to a mysterious feminine nature. You don't have the heart to tell him that last week's absence was just a dosage miscalculation and 3 solid days of hallucinating that your curtains were judging you. Still, it's sweet. In a society that suppresses every feeling except constipation, this is how romance survives. On paper, in secret, and always with the faint possibility that at least one party is not entirely lucid. You've been courting for 6 months. You've spoken in person maybe 5 times, always in the presence of chaperones who make heavy eye contact and cough at emotionally charged pauses. You once accidentally touched hands while reaching for a crumpet. It was electric. It was awkward. You nearly fainted. But again, that could have been the tincture. Your lover, let's call him Edmund, because of course it's Edmund, is deeply emotional in his writing and deeply confused in real life. He visits you weekly, sits 3 chairs away, and asks about the weather like it's a philosophical problem. But in his letters? Oh, in his letters he is Byron, with a better vocabulary. You suspect he may be taking the same laudanum blend as you, because one of his last notes ended with the phrase, "I long to evaporate into your shadow." Romantic? Maybe. Alarming? Also, yes. You respond in kind, scribbling your reply by candlelight, wrapped in a shawl, sipping syrup between metaphors. You tell him his words sustain your soul, that his absence burns like ice, and that you too have seen the butterflies. You do not elaborate. Sometimes you wonder what it would be like to fall in love without the haze, without the syrup, the fainting, the slow-motion emotions. But then you remember what your sober relatives are like, married off young, endlessly discussing drapery, and you realize maybe the fog is the point. Romance isn't about clarity, it's about drama. And what's more dramatic than love letters written under the influence of 10% opium and 90% repressed longing? Besides, in Victorian society, passion is always just one step away from diagnosis. Too enthusiastic and you're hysterical, too aloof and you're frigid. The safest course? Float gently through it, be softly in love, be quietly obsessed, and let the tincture take care of the rest. Edmund is coming to visit tomorrow. You'll sit together in the parlor, say absolutely nothing of substance, and exchange glances like it's the climax of a Shakespearean tragedy. He might bring flowers. You'll press them into a book of poetry. Later, you'll reread his latest letter and smile vaguely while the walls pulse slightly around you. Feeling blocked? Just take a little laudanum and stare at the wallpaper until it begins to move. Congratulations, you're halfway to writing the next Wuthering Heights, or at least a grocery list in perfect iambic pentameter. It's a rainy Thursday in Victorian England, and your quill has betrayed you. The ink has dried. The inspiration is gone. You sit at your desk, surrounded by papers, books, and the creeping dread of unexpressed emotion. You're supposed to be a writer, a poet, an artist of feeling, but all you've written today is a sentence about clouds that sounds suspiciously like a weather report. This is where the bottle comes in. You reach into the drawer and pull out your trusted creative companion, a small, unassuming vial of laudanum. The label reads, "Elixir of Clarity," which is Victorian for don't ask questions, just sip. You tip back a measured spoonful, taste something between cough syrup and antique furniture polish, and wait. Within minutes, your limbs loosen, your mind lifts, and suddenly the rain outside isn't dreary. It's tragic, romantic, symbolic. You're no longer trapped in a cold room with a deadline. You're in the moors of your imagination, where time is foggy and every shadow holds a metaphor. You are now a writer on opium, a sacred tradition. You're in excellent company. Samuel Taylor Coleridge wrote Kubla Khan after what he called an opium-induced dream. Thomas de Quincey wrote a whole memoir about his addiction, titled Confessions of an English Opium Eater, which is less a cautionary tale and more of a weirdly enthusiastic Yelp review. Even Charles Dickens allegedly dabbled when the muse was being difficult. There's something about Victorian literary life that thrives on being just slightly unhinged. The fashionable illness of the day is melancholy. The preferred lifestyle is cloistered eccentricity, and the favored drug is the one that makes your furniture look like it's whispering plot twists. So you do what every struggling Victorian artist does. You let the laudanum swirl through your bloodstream and wait for the ghosts of inspiration to arrive. You stare at the wallpaper. It begins to shimmer, not move, exactly. More like breathe. You blink once. Slowly. That's probably fine. Your pen moves across the page, like it's being guided by divine chaos. You write a poem that might be about longing or might be about soup. It's hard to tell. Either way, it's definitely deep. You pause to read it aloud, softly. The room approves. Or maybe that's just the wind. Or the bookcase. Hard to say. The beauty of writing while mildly narcotized is that everything feels profound. A cat knocking over a cup becomes a meditation on fate. A creaking floorboard is a metaphor for emotional instability. You spend 45 minutes describing a rose in such excruciating detail that you begin to question whether the rose even exists. By the end of the day, you've written 7 pages of something, possibly a short story, possibly your own will, and you feel triumphant. Of course, there are trade-offs. You don't remember how your day started. You may have forgotten to eat. There's a faint ink blot on your chin, and your manuscript is mostly legible, except for the part where you switched from English to what appears to be either French or a made-up language inspired by clouds. But no matter. You are a writer. You suffer, but with flair. You exist in a world where emotion is currency. Reality is optional. And no one questions your tendency to mutter literary quotes at potted plants. If anything, it adds to your mystique. And when people ask how you came up with that haunting final line of your poem, asterisk. And so the moon wept quietly into my shoes. Asterisk. You'll smile faintly, look into the middle distance, and say something enigmatic like, "The muses speak when the world sleeps. Step right up." Today only, purchase the elixir that will cure your nerves, whiten your teeth, and possibly dissolve your liver. Early advertising makes sure everyone knows misery is treatable for a price. You open your morning newspaper, expecting to read about local gossip, a royal sighting, or possibly another goose-related tragedy. Instead, what greets you is a full-page advertisement promising salvation in a bottle. Mrs. Waddington's elixir of vital spirits restores youth, vigor, and domestic tolerance. You blink. You're intrigued. You're also holding your back at a strange angle after fainting during corset lacing. Maybe this is your solution. Victorian advertising is in its golden age. Or more accurately, its Wild West phase. There are no regulations, no disclaimers, and certainly no truth in advertising laws. If someone with a printing press and a decent supply of snake oil wants to declare that their tonic will restore your marriage and clear your complexion, no one's going to stop them, especially if the label has cursive fonts and vaguely botanical illustrations. Everywhere you look, there are posters and leaflets and newspaper inserts for opium-laced miracle cures, usually accompanied by testimonials from people with names like Mrs. H.R. Frompton of Devon, who claims she couldn't walk, breathe, or smile until she drank a tablespoon of Dr. Muckleberry's universal tonic. Now she dances daily and no longer screams when she sees buttons. You walk into a general store, and the shelves look like a magician's pantry. Elixirs, cordials, drops, syrups, tonics, powders, each wrapped in beautifully printed paper and wax-sealed like they're delivering state secrets. Some promise to make you sleep, others claim they'll keep you awake for 3 days straight while writing a novel in Latin. A few do both, depending on how much you take and whether you've eaten that day. The ingredients? Oh, they're listed sort of. Calming botanicals, gentle morphia, stimulating alkaloids. A few proudly mention pure tincture of opium as if that's a selling point. And it is, because the Victorian public, bless their under-oxygenated hearts, has become totally enamored with the idea that the more something burns going down, the more likely it is to cure their sadness. And make no mistake, sadness is big business. Anxiety, melancholy, nerves, female hysteria, general dread, the vague sense that life is an endless grey tunnel of repressed dreams. Whatever your emotional ailment, there's a remedy for that. You don't need therapy, you need a product. Marketing leans hard into emotional appeal. Ads show delicate women holding their stomachs with furrowed brows, followed by the same woman, post-tonic, now smiling and possibly playing a harp. Children are depicted going from full-blown tantrum to angelic stillness with one spoonful of Nanny's night nectar. It's called advertising. Today, we might call it foreshadowing a lawsuit. And then there are the street hawkers, the unofficial sales reps of Victorian pharmacology, dressed in mismatched coats and the confidence of someone who has definitely never seen a medical degree. They shout rhyming slogans from market stalls. No need to cough, no need to cry, just sip this tonic and watch troubles fly. You're impressed. You're also pretty sure he just gave a bottle to a dog. Even royalty gets involved. If the Queen endorses a particular nerve tonic, it becomes the equivalent of a Victorian bestseller. Bottles fly off shelves, people hoard them in pantries. Someone writes a sonnet. A few weeks later, someone else starts hearing voices. But by then, there's a new miracle cure, this one with added radium. Your household soon develops its own collection. There's something for headaches, something for the children's restlessness, something for husbandal impatience, and something labeled, "Do not question this." You find it works great for both period cramps and social engagements. And while no one talks about the side effects, like memory loss, heart palpitations, or occasionally becoming convinced your neighbor is a bear in disguise, you all agree the packaging is lovely. So you take your tonic, straighten your lace collar, and head out into the soot-covered chaos with a spring in your step, a calm in your chest, and only a mild tremor in your left hand. There are things you talk about in public, like the weather and how much you hate the French, and things you don't. Your growing dependence on that little brown bottle hidden behind the family Bible. You don't mention it at tea. You don't bring it up during embroidery club. And you certainly don't write about it in your letters, unless you're referring to it obliquely as my drops or my nervous tincture, with a flourish of underlining that suggests both secrecy and an emotional breakdown in italics. Because in Victorian society, addiction doesn't exist. Not publicly. Not for people like you. There's no word for it, at least. Not one that applies to well-dressed women with lace cuffs and good manners. You're not addicted. You're delicate. You're nervous. You're prone to spells. The bottle is simply how you manage things. Like grief, boredom, and the crushing weight of being expected to smile through everything short of active combustion. It starts with a teaspoon, maybe 2, prescribed for sleeplessness, or headaches, or the vague but socially acceptable condition known as womanly unrest. It helps. It quiets the noise in your head, dulls the tightness in your chest, smooths the jagged edges of existing in a world where your opinion matters less than the table linen. You don't even realize how often you reach for it. It becomes part of the routine, like brushing your hair or silently resenting your husband. You keep it tucked discreetly in a drawer, behind a stack of devotional pamphlets you've never read. The label is smudged, but you know it by heart. Laudanum. Sweet, bitter, floral, and faintly like surrender. You sip it before guests arrive, so you can get through a conversation about roast mutton without screaming into a pillow. You take a little more before bed, so you don't lie awake wondering if this is all there is. Corsets, coughs, and vaguely disappointed relatives. You've stopped measuring precisely. That's a concern for people with more time and less trauma. But you don't talk about it. No one does. You see it in your friends, though. The slightly glazed look in their eyes, the way they drift mid-sentence, staring into their tea like it contains all the answers. The sudden bursts of laughter, followed by long, silent pauses. You know the signs. You also know better than to say anything. Because if someone noticed, truly noticed, it wouldn't be concern you'd receive. It would be judgment. Whispers. Sideways. Glances. At dinner. A quiet removal from invitations. Maybe a doctor's visit. Maybe a rest cure. Maybe being locked in your room with no books and a raw beefsteak pressed to your forehead like that ever solved anything. So instead, you all agree not to notice. You nod sympathetically when someone says they've been under the weather. You don't ask what's in the cup. You compliment the new shawl instead of asking why she hasn't eaten in 3 days. Because asking would break the spell. And no one wants that. And the truth is, it works until it doesn't. You miss a step on the stairs. You forget names. You drift off mid-prayer. Your hands tremble when pouring tea. People start to notice, but they don't say anything. Not because they don't see it, but because they do. And they recognize it. They recognize themselves. You keep telling yourself you'll cut back. Just a little. Once the season is over, once the children are grown, once your sister leaves, once you feel better, but the bottle's always there. Waiting. Whispering that it's not really a problem if no one talks about it. Victorian childhood is a minefield of disease, chores, and medicinal syrups that are less treat and more chemical experiment. Spoiler: none of them taste like bubblegum. Your name is probably something adorable like Nellie or Wilfred, and you're a child in Victorian England. This means you spend most of your time being slightly ill, vaguely neglected, and covered in a thin film of coal dust and moral instruction. You've already had scarlet fever, measles, and whatever the grumbles are. Your toys are made of wood, your shoes don't match, and you're constantly at risk of being told your eternal soul is in danger because you refused boiled cabbage. But don't worry, your caretakers have a solution. Enter the sweet, sticky miracle that is Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup. It comes in a charming little glass bottle with a picture of a calm, smiling baby on the label, exactly the opposite of your current state. You're screaming, teething, possibly possessed. The remedy? A syrup composed of sugar, alcohol, and enough morphine to anesthetize a pony. 1 spoonful later, the screaming stops. So does your will to stand upright. You drift into a semi-conscious state somewhere between nap time and out-of-body experience. Your mother sighs in relief. She hasn't had a full night of sleep since 1867. You, meanwhile, are seeing colours that don't exist yet and dreaming in Latin. This isn't unusual. Children in Victorian Britain are routinely prescribed medicinal tonics that make modern emergency room doctors drop their clipboards in horror. Got colic? Opium. Can't sleep? Opium. Sad because your pet rat died of tuberculosis? That's right, more opium. You could be 3 years old with a cough and still be dosed with something stronger than what most rock stars carry on tour. The advertisements call it calming. The results are more like chemical time travel. And don't think your sweets are safe, either. Candy is sold out of jars by mysterious shopkeepers who may or may not wash their hands, and the ingredients are fluid. Licorice can be laced with quinine. Gumdrops might contain lead. A toffee could double as a mild sedative. There's a reason Victorian kids are often portrayed as wide-eyed and ghostly. They're literally trying to survive their own snack time. Meanwhile, you're still expected to be useful. Childhood isn't a phase. It's unpaid labor in shorter pants. You sweep chimneys, carry water, shell peas, and recite Bible verses while half asleep from your latest medicinal microdose. If you're lucky, you go to school where the teachers are terrifying and the ink is possibly flammable. If you're really lucky, you don't get sent away for being nervous. Every adult insists they're doing this for your own good. Your mother says the syrup keeps you calm. Your father says it helps you build grit. Your governess says it makes tutoring easier when you're not trying to climb the curtains. But even in your syrup-fogged state, you sense something isn't right. You start developing a tolerance. You need more to sleep, more to sit still, more to remember your own name. But you're just a child, and the grown-ups are the ones with the little brown bottles. So you take what they give you, smile vaguely when asked how you're feeling, and spend your days floating through the Victorian era with a tea-stained bib and a full-blown chemical dependency. Sometimes, in your rare moments of clarity, you wonder what it's like to grow up without a daily dose of hallucinogens. You imagine a world where kids run around, eat actual fruit, and aren't expected to recite the Lord's Prayer while mildly hallucinating. It sounds nice. But here in the soot-covered present, the candy is spiked, the medicine is questionable, and your best friend just drank something labeled worm cordial. Whether you're in a factory or a parlor, everyone gets a mid-morning pick-me-up. And by pick-me-up, I mean something that would be illegal in 137 countries today. You're halfway through your day in Victorian England, and your energy has hit a dramatic low. You've already performed the emotional labor of not screaming during breakfast, endured 2 unsolicited comments about your posture, and folded enough linens to qualify for a minor knighthood in domestic suffering. It's time for a break. Or, as your housemaid affectionately calls it, tonic o'clock. Because in this era, everyone needs a little boost to get through the endless grey fog of propriety, pollution, and monologues about damp. And coffee, tea, please. That's child's play. What you need is something stronger. Something that comes in a corked glass bottle, smells faintly of treacle and despair, and promises to cure your cough and your existential fatigue. You reach for the cough mixture, a charmingly vague term that can mean anything from a mild expectorant to a full-on chemical experience. The label says it's soothing. The ingredients say it's mostly opium and alcohol. 1 teaspoon and suddenly you don't mind that your cousin just described his breakfast in excruciating detail for the 3rd time today. This isn't just medicine. This is your productivity enhancer. It's how the working classes keep moving, and the upper classes keep pretending they aren't bored to death. You, personally, have developed a fondness for a brand called Dr. Etherby's Pulmonary Pep Tonic, which contains a medicinal blend of botanical extracts, a phrase which, upon further inspection, includes belladonna, peppermint, and a dose of morphine that could flatten a pony. You sip it delicately, as a lady must, and feel the mixture take hold. Your limbs relax, your brain defogs. Suddenly, everything seems manageable. Laundry? Sure. A social call from your least favorite aunt? Bring it on. 3 consecutive hours of polite nodding while pretending to listen to a monologue about doilies. You were made for this. If you're working class, the process is even more direct. Factory owners, ever concerned with efficiency, happily supply workers with tonic breaks, which are a polite euphemism for slightly narcotized labor. You drink your mixture at the break bell, lean against a brick wall while your fingers tingle faintly, then head back inside to operate machinery that would give modern OSHA representatives a stroke. Nobody questions the practice. Not really. The tonics are sold as restoratives, strengtheners, or bracing cures. Advertisements show robust individuals with glowing cheeks and zero signs of dependency. The implication is clear. Real adults drink their medicine and get on with it. What's more, it's perfectly fashionable. Bottles sit on desks next to ink pots and letters from distant relatives. Your physician recommends it for low spirits. Your neighbor claims it helps her garden better. Your husband uses it before dinner parties to make the conversation seem more tolerable, or at least surreal enough to enjoy. And sure, there are a few minor issues. You sometimes forget what day it is. You may have answered a telegram with a haiku. And one time, after 2 spoonfuls too many, you claimed the houseplants were gossiping about your posture. But all things considered, you're doing fine. The real danger isn't the medicine, it's the silence. No one talks about the growing reliance. No one asks why half the neighborhood seems faintly dazed by 11 a.m. It's just understood. The mixture keeps things civil, keeps the hands moving, keeps the thoughts from wandering too far into what is the point of any of this. You close the bottle, place it neatly back in your drawer, and smooth your skirts. You feel calm, ready, alert, but in a poetic sort of way. You are, in modern terms, thriving, with a strong chance of gently hallucinating. Because in the Victorian world, wellness isn't about balance, it's about getting through the day without screaming. And if your cough mixture happens to be your coping mechanism, well, who's going to cough about it? You're attending the luncheon of the season, where the only things on the menu are gossip, veiled insults, and a little restorative cordial to help the conversation flow, and your memory fade. Your gloves are spotless, your bonnet is aggressively large, and your nerves? Well, your nerves are being held together by 1 teaspoon of laudanum, and the faint hope that no one will ask you about your last dinner party, which you may or may not have hallucinated entirely. Welcome to the Victorian Ladies' Luncheon. Part social engagement, part power struggle, part low-grade chemical experiment. You're here to maintain your status, make polite conversation, and navigate the unspoken but very real game of aristocratic thrones. Every gesture is calculated. Every smile is a weapon, and every cup of tea may contain a secret that starts with tincture of. The table is set with fine china, heavy silver, and enough doilies to smother a small horse. The centerpiece is tasteful, in the sense that it cost more than some families earn in a month. You take your seat, adjust your skirts, and prepare to engage in the single most dangerous activity known to high society: talking to other women while slightly sedated. Lady Fairfax sits to your left. She greets you with a smile that has at least 3 meanings and possibly a mild curse. You offer her a compliment on her brooch. She replies by complimenting your courage to wear such a bold shade of lavender. You sip your tea and pretend not to taste the sharp edge of laudanum at the bottom. It's common practice. Everyone does it. A dash of cordial to smooth the nerves. A sprinkle of syrup to keep the anxiety of social performance from boiling over. After all, you're not just attending lunch, you're performing stability. And if your performance requires a mild narcotic, so be it. The courses arrive one by one, none of them quite enough to be considered actual food. A whisper of cucumber, a lonely scone, an aggressively dry biscuit. No one is here to eat. You're here to see and be seen, to judge and be judged, to deliver a comment so delicately cutting that it requires a follow-up apology sealed in wax. The real feast is the gossip. Whispers about who was seen at the opera with whom, the latest scandal involving a distant cousin and a misplaced hatpin, and, of course, the quiet speculation about who's been leaning a little too heavily on their nervous tonic. Everyone suspects someone. No one suspects themselves. You make small talk with Lady Beatrice. whose pupils are so dilated you can see your reflection in them. She speaks passionately about the importance of modesty while forgetting the name of her own husband. You nod, offer her another biscuit, and quietly wonder if she even knows where she is. But she's polite, impeccably dressed, and still upright. So by Victorian standards, she's thriving. You find yourself laughing at a joke you didn't understand, smiling just a second too long, and losing track of which duchess was disowned for which indescribable offence. But none of it matters. The room is warm, the tea is spiked, and reality has taken a brief holiday. As the luncheon winds down, you rise gracefully, wave your fan like a diplomatic flag, and excuse yourself before your brain fully unplugs from your body. You exit to the drawing room, where you'll engage in another round of subtle barbs disguised as compliments, all while sipping a second glass of something with restorative in the name and coma in the outcome. Death is everywhere, so is mourning jewelry. And so, inevitably, is laudanum. When you can't face another funeral, you reach for your trusty medicine and hope not to see ghosts again. It's a Tuesday, you think. You're not entirely sure because the household calendar has been covered in black crepe for a month and a half. Another cousin has died, or possibly an uncle, maybe someone's husband. The details are fuzzy, but the grief is mandatory. You've been in mourning for what feels like most of your adult life. First your grandmother, then your sister, then the neighbor's cat, which you weren't technically close to, but etiquette required at least a polite sob. In Victorian society, grief isn't a private affair. It's a full-time job with a strict dress code and limited room for snacks. You wear black from your chin to your ankles. Your accessories are made of jet. Your veil is heavier than your emotional baggage, and your facial expression must remain a delicate balance of tragic beauty and mild constipation. You are not allowed to smile. You are not allowed to attend parties. You are, however, allowed to faint stylishly. Bonus points if you do it while holding a handkerchief monogrammed in funereal script. And in the middle of all this, surprise, you are still expected to function. Write thank you notes for condolence letters. Host somber luncheons. Maintain a home filled with sorrow and undercooked lamb, all while pretending you don't feel like curling into a ball and whispering to the drapes. So, you reach for the bottle. Laudanum doesn't cure grief, but it makes it floatier, softer around the edges, like you're walking through your own life while wrapped in several layers of fog and velvet. The tears still come, but they arrive slower, less violently. Sometimes you forget why you're crying. Other times, you cry because you've forgotten to cry at the proper time. The etiquette books are very clear on scheduling. The funerals blend together. The ministers drone. The choir sings in minor keys. You mouth the words, unsure whether you're attending a burial or just reliving one in a dream. The laudanum helps you get through the hymns without visibly unraveling, which, according to your aunt, is the true sign of breeding. There's also the jewelry, mourning trinkets made of hair. Yes, actual hair. Pressed into lockets and rings, braided into tiny wreaths that sit around your neck like the world's most sentimental parasite. You try not to think about how many scalps had to be snipped to decorate your wrists. When nighttime falls, things get worse. Victorian houses are dim. The gaslight flickers. The wallpaper has patterns that move if you look too long. The laudanum wears off. Or perhaps it doesn't. You lie in bed, still in half-mourning attire, because taking off your corset feels like giving up entirely, and you wait for sleep, or something like it. Sometimes you see shadows. Sometimes you hear your name. Once, you had a very calm conversation with your deceased grandfather about his feelings on asparagus. You don't mention this to anyone, of course. It's either grief or ghosts or opium-induced hallucination. and none of those are considered fashionable breakfast topics. You are praised for your composure, for being strong, for not causing a scene at the memorial. You're a rock, they say. What they don't realize is that the rock is heavily sedated and occasionally forgets which drawer the forks are in, because in Victorian England, mourning is expected, but processing emotions is not. You are allowed to be sad. You are not allowed to be messy, and so you dose yourself just enough to survive another day of dignified despair. Public outrage over opium dens, usually run by foreigners, of course, distracts nicely from the fact that half the upper class is already high as a kite before noon. You're sitting in the drawing room with a cup of tea, half laced with your digestive cordial, when the morning paper lands with an ominous thump. You flip through it absent-mindedly, ignoring the usual nonsense about rainfall and royal appearances, until your eye catches the latest headline: Dark Shadows in the East End. The Opium Dens of London Exposed. The article reads like a Gothic novella. Mysterious back alleys, exotic curtains, dangerous foreigners, leading innocent young men astray with smoke, silk, and sin. You raise an eyebrow and glance at the bottle sitting quietly on your side table, still warm from your last dose. You, too, are currently enjoying the effects of opium, but in a far more respectable outfit. See, you're not one of those people. You're not reclining on a stained mattress in a foggy cellar next to a stranger with an embroidered vest. You're reclining on a fainting couch. There are antimacassars involved. Your version of drug use comes with cucumber sandwiches and a vague sense of moral superiority. The opium panic isn't really about opium. It's about optics. Victorian society is knee-deep in narcotics, but as long as you're a respectable woman with a delicate constitution or a gentleman with nerves, you're considered a patient, not an addict. Laudanum, morphine, cough syrup fortified with dreams, these are medicinal, prescribed, packaged in glass bottles with elegant cursive. Nothing illicit about it. But the dens, oh, the dens, they're the perfect distraction. A horror story to feed the public while the aristocracy continues their slow drift into medically approved oblivion. The government cracks down. Missionaries campaign. Lawmakers posture dramatically about the moral decay of the empire, all while sipping their own chemist's blend of brandy and bittersweet poppy extract. You decide to read on, mostly for entertainment. The article claims a young clerk entered an East End opium den and emerged a ghost of a man, no longer capable of civilized thought or conversation, which, in fairness, also describes your cousin Rupert before he ever touched the stuff. You picture the stereotypical den, velvet drapes, the scent of incense and human despair, shadows cast by flickering lanterns, someone in the corner quoting Confucius while actively drooling. In reality, most of these places are just dimly lit rooms where tired laborers go to escape the constant terror of being alive in 19th century London. But none of that matters to the papers. The real issue is the foreign threat. It's always foreign. The opium panic gives society an easy villain, one they can point to, criminalize, and sensationalize. Never mind that the British Empire itself imported and profited from opium for decades. Never mind that your grandmother takes 3 drops of tincture before she waters the plants. No, the problem is them, and so the cycle continues. Respectable citizens keep popping pills and sipping syrups while clutching their pearls at the thought of unsavory dens corrupting our youth. You pass by an apothecary selling over-the-counter morphine in the shape of throat lozenges. A woman next to you is buying infant pacifiers made of sugar and narcotics. Nobody blinks, but if someone opens a pipe in a basement, scandal. You stir another spoonful of nerve tonic into your tea and wonder how much longer everyone can pretend this isn't the same drug in fancier packaging. The truth is, the dens are only dangerous because they're visible, because they don't come with lace gloves and prescriptions. You sip, you smile, you turn the page. Running out of laudanum is not just inconvenient, it's an existential crisis. Shivering, sweating, and hallucinating, you swear you'll never touch the stuff again until the next headache. It starts subtly. You misplace your bottle. You think, no bother, I'll fetch another tomorrow. But tomorrow comes, and the apothecary is closed. A sign on the door reads, "Family emergency, back shortly," which is Victorian for gone for 2 days with no explanation. By mid-afternoon, your hands are trembling. You chalk it up to poor sleep or too much embroidery. But by evening, your heart is galloping like an anxious horse, and you're pacing the parlor, unsure whether you're searching for the bottle or for your own lost sanity. This is withdrawal. But no one calls it that. Not yet. Instead, they say you're having a spell, a turn, a nervous flowering of the mind. You have chills, but also sweat. You're anxious and drowsy. You're angry at the wallpaper. You cry because someone moved your knitting. You laugh because the floorboards seem to be breathing in rhythm with your thoughts. It's not pretty. You try to distract yourself. You sit in your chair and try to read, but the words swim. You sip tea, but it tastes wrong. Your neighbor stops by, and her voice sounds like it's echoing from inside a seashell. You smile politely while gripping the edge of your teacup like it's a flotation device. Your maid asks if you're feeling well. You respond by quoting a Shakespearean monologue that doesn't exist. She nods and quietly removes the scissors from the room. At night, it gets worse. You curl into bed, sweating through lace and linen, your thoughts flitting between past regrets and vague doom. Your body aches, your muscles twitch. At one point, you're certain your grandmother's ghost floats in and tells you you've left the stove on. You don't even own a stove. There's a knocking in your head, a humming in your blood. Your dreams are not dreams. They're emotional documentaries narrated by guilt, shame, and the distant ringing of bells that might not be real. You swear that if you survive this night, you will never take another drop again. You'll live clean. You'll embrace fresh air, herbal teas, vigorous walks, and all the other useless advice your doctor gave you before prescribing opium in the first place. By morning, you're a husk, pale, puffy-eyed, soaked in sweat, and absolutely convinced that one more day of this will kill you. You crawl downstairs like a ghost on vacation and consider writing your will. And then you hear it. The bell over the apothecary door. He's back. You don't walk. You float to the shop. You burst in with all the restraint of a parched desert traveler discovering a wine cellar. The apothecary looks alarmed. You smile like you haven't just spent the night communing with invisible bees. Just the usual, you whisper, voice cracking like a cheap mirror. The moment that brown bottle touches your hand, your entire nervous system sends up a cheer. You race home, measure out a modest teaspoon, and take double. The liquid burns sweetly down your throat. Within minutes, your heartbeat slows. Your thoughts rearrange into neat little rows. The floorboards stop humming. The wallpaper behaves. Relief washes over you like a warm bath of denial. So much for your vow. So much for tea and sunlight. You know what this means. You know this isn't good. You know that, technically, you are no longer using laudanum, you're being used by it. But Victorian society doesn't have rehab. It doesn't have therapy. It has apothecaries, fainting couches, and the hope that if you smile quietly enough, no one will notice your unraveling. All those poppies don't grow themselves. The British Empire is knee-deep in the opium trade, importing misery from afar and exporting moral panic right back out again. You sip your laudanum-laced tea in the comfort of your respectable parlor, staring into the floral abyss of your wallpaper, and never once stop to wonder, where did it all come from? You assume the opium just appears, like fog, or your mother-in-law, but the truth is, every dreamy drop in that little brown bottle has traveled thousands of miles, from hands that planted it, harvested it, packed it, and shipped it, all so you could gently self-medicate while pretending you don't know what's in your own medicine. Let's zoom out. The British Empire, at the height of its power, is not just a global superpower, it's a global dealer. Specifically, a dealer of poppies, grown in vast, sun-scorched fields across British-controlled India, harvested by locals who are paid in despair and occasionally food, and then processed into opium cakes, dense, resinous bricks of concentrated colonial ambition. These are shipped en masse to China. You may ask, wait, weren't the British also very anti-drug? Ah, that's the paradox. At home, opium is a medicinal marvel. Abroad, it's a geopolitical weapon. While Victorian newspapers wring their hands over foreign dens of vice, the empire is actively flooding the East with narcotics. All in the name of trade balance and civilizing influence, of course. It starts with tea. The British love tea. They consume it with the intensity of a toddler-handed espresso. But China controls the tea trade, and they want silver in return, not British goods, which, let's be honest, no one in China is asking for. So what do you do when you need to buy more tea but don't have the cash? Easy. You sell them a drug they didn't ask for. The result? The Opium Wars. Yes, wars, plural. Picture this. British gunboats forcing open Chinese ports not because of freedom or democracy, but because someone said no to more heroin. The empire dressed it up in silk and diplomacy. But the reality is, people died so you could enjoy a sedative with your breakfast toast. At home, though, silence. You and your neighbors continue dosing yourselves into oblivion while clucking disapprovingly at those people in far-off lands who can't seem to get their habits under control. You tell yourself it's different. You have a prescription, a lace doily, a nice accent. Surely that counts for something. And while politicians condemn the foreign vice of opium dens in London's East End, the very government they represent is pocketing profits from a trade so massive it underwrites entire regions of the imperial economy. So yes, your laudanum is technically a war commodity. It passes through scorched villages, over broken treaties, and across oceans, only to land gently on your tongue in a teaspoon of relief. You never meet the people who grew it. You never read the treaties it violated. You never hear the gunfire. All you know is that it helps you sleep. That's the paradox. Moral panic at home, moral abandonment abroad. The Victorian Empire proclaims virtue while wading through fields of narcotics. It condemns addiction while monetizing it. It builds libraries and prisons in equal measure, with the same hand that signs the shipping manifests. Eventually, someone notices that half the population is sedated. Enter the temperance movement. Because nothing says fun like a support group in a church basement with weak tea and strong opinions, you first hear about the movement from your cousin Margaret, who now insists on referring to her tea parties as cleansing circles. You expected cucumber sandwiches. You got a pamphlet titled Sobriety and Salvation: How to Recognize the Devil in Your Cupboard. So not the relaxing afternoon you'd hoped for. The temperance movement begins innocently enough. A few well-meaning types notice that their friends and relatives are either passed out before noon or developing the peculiar habit of weeping uncontrollably during hymn practice. They conclude, quite rightly, that society may be over-medicating. The problem? Everyone's on something. Laudanum, paregoric, tincture of this, cordial of that. Children are pacified with morphine. Mothers self-soothe with opiates. Fathers swear by tonic bitters that contain a suspicious amount of gin. The pharmacy is less a place for healing and more a socially sanctioned alchemy lab for numbing human emotion. But the temperance folks? They want to feel things, which, ironically, makes them the most radical group in town. They begin by targeting alcohol. It's the most visible culprit. Drunkenness, they say, leads to moral decay, financial ruin, and fainting into your Sunday roast. But soon, the scope widens. What about opium, laudanum, the soothing syrups prescribed to every man, woman, and colicky baby? The answer: absolutely not. Cold turkey for everyone. So now you're at a gathering in a poorly lit church basement, sipping tepid tea with a group of people who haven't smiled since the Corn Laws. The air smells faintly of liniment, unprocessed judgment. Someone's playing a hymn on the harmonium. Another person is reading aloud from a tract titled The Tyranny of the Tincture. You miss your cordial. The movement gains traction. Suddenly, there are clubs, lectures, and entire newspapers devoted to sobriety. Reformers march through the streets waving banners and handing out flyers to dazed-looking passers-by who are just trying to buy bread without being guilt-tripped. Some meetings get emotional. Testimonies are given. People share stories of how they used to hallucinate during breakfast, but now find peace in dry biscuits and long walks. You try not to fall asleep. There's an early form of rehab, though no one calls it that yet. It usually involves being sent to a countryside retreat where you're expected to sweat, pray, and not scream into the wallpaper. No medicine, no stimulants, just cold water, moral clarity, and the relentless judgment of someone named Ruth. You give it a try. You last 3 days. The tea is weak. The food is grey. You experience emotions you'd long buried under layers of laudanum. Grief, boredom. The vague realization that your marriage may have been a mistake. By the time the 3rd session of silent reflection begins, you start hallucinating Victorian wallpaper patterns in the bark of trees. You return home under the guise of relapse prevention. You tell your friends the countryside was invigorating. They nod in quiet understanding. Everyone knows what that means. Because here's the thing: temperance makes good points, but withdrawal is loud. Recovery is hard. And the world you live in doesn't exactly encourage emotional transparency. Not when dignity, decorum, and repression are the 3 pillars holding up your entire personality. So you sip your tea, now only slightly laced with syrup, and tell yourself you're doing better. You've cut back. You're in control. You only take your medicine when absolutely necessary, which just so happens to be every time someone starts quoting the Book of Proverbs at dinner. Temperance is coming. Modern rehab is on the horizon, but for now, you're still balancing on the delicate Victorian tightrope between social respectability and chemical survival. As addiction rates soar, the government finally decides maybe, just maybe, laudanum isn't the answer to everything. Cue regulations, new scandals, and a lot of angry letters to the Times. You begin to notice the shift in the air. Not that you can feel much under 3 layers of crinoline and a light morphine buzz, but there's something different. People are whispering about regulations. Pharmacists are getting twitchy. And worst of all, the latest issue of The Lancet contains a rather rude article implying that some of your medicinal habits might be problematic. Scandalous. It begins quietly. A few doctors, clearly having nothing better to do, start collecting statistics. They claim that opium-related deaths are on the rise, that babies are being over-soothed, that middle-class women are showing signs of addiction, like irritability, insomnia, or confessing to their feelings. Naturally, society panics. Not about the addiction, of course, about the optics. The upper crust is horrified. Not that so many people are hooked on laudanum, but that everyone knows about it now. What was once a personal coping mechanism with an elegant label and a decorative cork is now a public issue, a subject of parliamentary debate. And worse, newspaper editorials. You read one such editorial over breakfast. It says that mothers are failing their children, doctors are failing their patients, and society is teetering on the brink of collapse. All because people are irresponsibly dosing themselves into oblivion. You sip your tea laced, naturally, and wonder if the author would feel differently if he had to host 3 luncheons a week with nothing but boiled meat and ennui for company. But the government is not interested in your feelings. The government wants legislation. In 1868, the Pharmacy Act is passed. For the first time, opium and its derivatives are restricted. No more casual purchases from the back shelf next to the licorice. Now you need a qualified pharmacist to hand you your narcotics, one who can spell pharmacology and ideally count past 10. It's revolutionary, it's sensible, and you hate it. You try to keep calm. Perhaps this will blow over. But it doesn't. The medical journals keep printing statistics. Hospitals report rising numbers of accidental poisonings. Someone publishes a pamphlet titled Laudanum, the silent killer in your cabinet, which is honestly rude considering how many dinner parties you've survived thanks to it. Public discourse turns heated. Some demand full bans. Others insist on better labeling. One woman writes to the Times, suggesting that mothers who use opium syrups should be arrested for child endangerment. You briefly fantasize about hitting her with a bonnet box. Pharmacies are now inspected. Tinctures get dosage warnings. Tonic bottles shrink. Suddenly, the beautiful brown glass containers you used to collect like seashells now come with skull and crossbones stickers. Nothing ruins your aesthetic like poison labels in bold print. Even society begins to shift. Church groups push abstinence. Middle-class women are urged to return to natural remedies like fresh air, self-denial, and praying through the pain. The phrase chemical dependency enters polite vocabulary, though no one is entirely sure what it means. You pretend not to relate. But behind all this moral fervor is something very new. The idea that addiction is not just a personal failing, but a public health crisis. That perhaps, just perhaps, asking people to survive Victorian life without help, support, or something mildly narcotic might be unrealistic. You take a deep breath. You consider cutting back, maybe switching to herbal tea. Then your child starts crying. Your husband asks about dinner, and your corset makes a noise that sounds like betrayal. You reach for the bottle. Because even if society is changing, you still have to survive until bedtime. And if that requires a little help from the poppy, well, let the Times write what it wants. Even as the era fades, the ghosts of laudanum linger on. Modern medicine owes a debt to Victorian innovation. And, honestly, a few lawsuits. You wake up in the 21st century, roll over, and press a button to heat your bedroom. The bed is memory foam. The mattress cover is antimicrobial. Your coffee arrives through a programmable machine with a setting called panic strength. You don't think much of it, but you should. Because if you trace the thread back far enough, from that ibuprofen bottle in your drawer to your aunt's nerve cream to the prescription drugs locked in the cabinet, you'll find a familiar friend at the root of it all, the Victorian opium obsession, the real patient zero of the modern pharmaceutical industry. It all starts with laudanum, that syrupy, deceptive little miracle. It blurred the line between medicine and indulgence. It soothed babies, composed poets, numbed the heartbroken, and gave housewives the strength to survive family dinners and corsets made of spite. And while Victorian society eventually realized the side effects of casually sipping plant-based euphoria every 4 hours, they also made a crucial discovery. People will pay a lot of money to not feel things. Fast forward. Pharmaceutical companies are born. Chemists begin tinkering with opium's molecules like Victorian kids poking a bear with a stick. The result? Morphine, then codeine, then heroin. Because apparently the lesson wasn't, maybe we should stop. But what if it was faster? Heroin was literally developed by Bayer in the late 1800s and marketed as a non-addictive alternative to morphine. You know, for children. It didn't go well, but even as the mistakes piled up, overdoses, dependency, very dramatic fainting spells, the innovation didn't stop. Victorians didn't just leave us their addictions, they left us the blueprint for how we think about medicine. Quick fixes, bottled solutions, and the idea that emotions are symptoms that need suppressing. Your local pharmacy? A direct descendant of the Victorian apothecary, only with fewer rats and more fluorescent lighting. Modern prescription labels? They exist because Victorian patent medicines used to say things like cures everything including sadness and contained ingredients that could legally be described as witchcraft adjacent. Clinical trials, medical licensing, and regulatory oversight, brought to you by a long and glorious history of people accidentally creating highly addictive substances and handing them out like cough drops at choir practice. But it's not all bad. The Victorian opium age, with all its tragedy and drama, did lay the foundation for modern anesthetics, pain management, psychiatry, and pharmacology. It forced doctors to ask hard questions about how the body processes chemicals and how the soul survives discomfort. It made clear the thin, trembling line between medicine and poison, between relief and reliance, between healing and hiding. Even now, echoes of the poppy linger in our culture. We romanticize Victorian melancholy, adore tragic poets, and still occasionally reach for a bottle when life gets too loud. Our relationship with substances hasn't changed as much as we'd like to believe. It's just better branded now. Your painkillers come with barcodes. Your sleeping pills have FDA approval. But the intention is the same. Quiet the noise, ease the ache. Make it through one more long, complicated day. And that's the Victorian legacy. A world where science, commerce, desperation, and habit collided in a swirl of lace and syrup, and reshaped how we understand what it means to feel better. So the next time you open your medicine cabinet, spare a thought for the fainting woman in 1875, curled on a sofa, sipping her teaspoon of laudanum while trying not to scream into a throw pillow. It's Tuesday morning. You've already scrubbed the floor, repressed 3 emotions, and smiled politely at a husband who thinks helping means holding the newspaper with extra vigor. Good news, the apothecaries got just the thing to take the edge off. Endless laundry and unsolicited advice. Another dose of laudanum with your midday sherry. Domestic harmony. Now available in syrup form. You wake at dawn, not because you want to, but because your internal Victorian alarm clock is set to eternal servitude. The baby's teething, the maid is missing, again, and the kitchen smells faintly of despair and boiled turnip. Your husband, blissfully unaware of anything not printed in the Times, asks for toast. You consider setting the house on fire. But instead, you smile, butter the bread, and pretend your eyelid isn't twitching. By 10 a.m., You've already swept, dusted, stitched a hem, corrected your children's Latin, and hosted a neighbor who came by just to check if your roses are doing well, but somehow managed to insult your curtains, your posture, and your daughter's piano playing, all in one breath. You're emotionally drained, physically exhausted, socially overdosed. Time for your real medicine. You slip into the sitting room, where your bottle of laudanum waits quietly behind the biscuit tin. It's a modest pour today, just enough to take the edge off your rising existential dread and make your husband's nasal humming sound like distant bagpipes instead of a form of psychological warfare. This is Victorian domestic life. A carousel of chores, politeness, and quietly simmering rage, smothered under a doily. You're expected to smile, look lovely, and never, ever complain. Women who speak their minds get labeled nervous. Women who don't, they get a prescription. You've perfected the art of functioning while mildly sedated. Your house sparkles. Your children memorize French irregular verbs. Your husband doesn't notice you've started calling him Lord Useless in your head. You attend teas, write thank you notes, and read novels that conveniently fall out of your hands once the syrup kicks in. The apothecary knows you by name. He doesn't judge. He simply hands over your bottle with the kind of sympathetic nod usually reserved for funeral processions and opera widows. You sometimes wonder if his wife also drinks her breakfast. And it's not just you. Every respectable woman on the street has her own version. Mrs. Golding prefers her nerve drops. Lady Whitmore claims her doctor recommended brain elixir after her third child began speaking in riddles. Even the vicar's wife has a little tonic she takes before Sunday service to settle her soul. You all nod knowingly when someone uses the phrase, "just a little something for the nerves." Midday arrives. You've rearranged the linen cupboard, rewritten a shopping list 6 times, and resisted the urge to scream into a pillow monogrammed with gratitude. You pour a splash of sherry into your cup, then a whisper of laudanum, then, oops, a generous splash. Domestic goddess unlocked. The edge softens. The children's shrieking becomes ambient noise. Your husband's questions, "Where are my socks? Why is this spoon slightly bent?" fade into static. You can now endure the remainder of the day with a glazed smile and a voice 2 octaves softer than your actual rage. Dinner is served. Everyone pretends this is normal, and maybe it is. Because in Victorian England, the ideal wife isn't loud or opinionated or even especially happy. She's efficient, pleasant, tastefully sedated, a human doily with a pulse and a recipe book. And if her secret to success happens to be a teaspoon of liquid oblivion several times a day, well, that's just good housekeeping. You're invited to a neighbor's parlor for an evening of polite conversation, parlor games, and maybe a demonstration of Dr. Finley's invigorating cordial. No one knows what's actually in it, but the more you drink, the funnier your neighbor's stories get. Welcome to the Victorian Tupperware party. Except the leftovers might be hallucinations. It begins, as all Victorian social events do, with an invitation written in cursive, so elaborate it could be a summoning spell. You arrive wearing your most polite bonnet, prepared to smile until your jaw locks. The hostess greets you with a strained enthusiasm and offers you a glass of something that smells like peppermint, turpentine, and danger. "Just a little pick-me-up," she whispers, eyes wide with the hope that this gathering doesn't devolve into tears and a game of charades like the last one. You accept the glass. Of course you do. Declining would be rude. And besides, everyone else is already sipping theirs, including the vicar's wife, who hasn't blinked since the soup course. Tonight's entertainment isn't a string quartet or a dramatic reading of Byron. It's something far more thrilling. A live demonstration of Dr. Finley's invigorating cordial, courtesy of his enthusiastic cousin Edwin, who arrived clutching a satchel of mysterious bottles and the overly eager energy of someone who once sold umbrellas door to door in a drought. Edwin begins with a speech about the marvelous intersection of science and God's mercy. You're not sure what that means, but you're 3 sips in and your knees are starting to hum. He explains that Dr. Finley's cordial contains only the purest ingredients: spring water, botanical extracts, a dash of sassafras, and a generous helping of something he refers to only as the spirit of vitality. Spoiler: it's probably opium, or cocaine, or both. The effects are undeniable. Within minutes, the parlor becomes animated. People are laughing at jokes that aren't funny. Someone starts playing the piano with the flair of a caffeinated raccoon. A gentleman in the corner begins passionately explaining the shape of clouds. It is 8:17 p.m. You begin to wonder if this is what joy feels like, or if your body is simply entering a state of pharmaceutical surrender. This is the Victorian patent medicine party, part social ritual, part multi-level marketing scheme, part accidental group hallucination. Instead of plastic containers or scented candles, your hostess is selling optimism in a bottle, and everyone is buying. The beauty of patent medicine is that no one knows what's in it, and no one asks. The label might say elixir, cordial, or blood purifier, but those are just decorative lies. What really matters is how you feel, which, right now, is somewhere between aggressively sociable and spiritually airborne. As the night progresses, so do the side effects. A woman near the fireplace begins giggling at a doily. 2 men attempt to waltz with a coat rack. Someone claims to have solved the class crisis in a single sentence and is applauded for it. You realize that your own legs feel very far away. Edwin, meanwhile, is still talking. He's offering a special price just for tonight. 1 bottle for £1, 3 for 2, or a deluxe family wellness kit that includes a pamphlet, a certificate of sincerity, and a small wooden spoon. You buy 2, why not? You're not going to remember this tomorrow anyway. By the end of the evening, everyone is blissfully unaware of the chemical symphony playing inside their veins. Hugs are exchanged, blessings given. Someone recites a poem about starlight and goats. You drift home through gaslit streets, swaying slightly, clutching your purchases like trophies from a battle you don't recall entering. Victorian social life may demand grace, modesty, and endless self-restraint, but give people a mysterious cordial and half a reason to believe, and suddenly everyone's best friends with the wallpaper. And you know what? You're already looking forward to next week's herbal tonic supper. You're not addicted, you're just managing your nerves. Victorian etiquette means never admitting to anything more scandalous than a double helping of pudding. So everyone simply agrees to call their laudanum tonic, their withdrawal, the vapors, and their blackouts unexpected rest. Social survival means pretending nothing is wrong, especially when everything is. It's Thursday afternoon, and your hands are shaking, but delicately, tastefully. You steady yourself with a teaspoon of what your doctor calls a comforting compound, and your neighbor calls God's mercy in a bottle. You, of course, don't call it anything. Naming things makes them real. In the world of Victorian manners, truth is rarely spoken above a whisper, and certainly never before tea. It's not just discouraged, it's positively indecent. Better to cloak your struggles in euphemism and embroidery, and trust that everyone else is doing the same. You're not nodding off mid-sentence. You're conserving energy. You're not having hallucinations. You're blessed with a vivid imagination. That strange rash? A seasonal bloom. Your tendency to stare at the wallpaper for 3 hours straight without blinking. Reflective thought. Possibly spiritual. This is the delicate ballet of Victorian social life. Everyone is waltzing in a fog of denial and tincture. smiling just wide enough to hide the fact that half the room is floating gently away from their bodies. You go to a garden party. A woman collapses in the shrubbery. She claims it's the heat. It's 12 degrees Celsius. Someone offers her a lemon water. She requests a cordial. Everyone nods, no one comments, and the conversation resumes exactly where it left off. The price of gooseberries and the scandal of Lady Pembroke's mismatched gloves. That's etiquette. That's decency. You once spent an entire dinner pretending not to notice a guest spooning digestive drops into her soup. Her pupils dilated. Her conversation drifted into ancient Greek. The host remarked on her continental flair. No one broke eye contact. No one mentioned the fact that she appeared to be arguing with the ficus. Polite society operates on the principle that if you say nothing, then nothing bad is happening. Illness is fine as long as it's poetic. Addiction is acceptable as long as it's called something else. You may weep softly in the conservatory, but only if you do it gracefully and blame it on your nerves, the moon, or poor air quality. Even your doctor plays along. He asks if you've been feeling overwhelmed lately, and when you nod, he prescribes a restorative. No questions, no lectures, just a refill. It's medical care, Victorian style, maximum courtesy, minimal confrontation, and a prescription that tastes like oblivion and cloves. At church, the sermon warns against overindulgence of the soul. No mention of overmedication. After all, it would be rude to accuse the congregation of spiritual weakness when half of them are riding a gentle laudanum wave toward salvation. Everyone looks serene. Or unconscious. It's hard to tell. You host a luncheon. You serve tea, biscuits, and a side of performative sanity. Someone spills their tonic. No one reacts. Someone else forgets where they are mid-sentence. You fan them gently and offer a refreshing drop. They perk up. Conversation continues. This is how it works. You aren't expected to be well, you're expected to appear well, to keep smiling, to dress the part, to make sure your breakdowns are discreet and your dependencies are decanted into crystal bottles. Social grace isn't about honesty. It's about plausible deniability wrapped in lace. So you refill your teaspoon. You powder your face. You straighten your posture. Because in Victorian society, decorum is everything. And no one wants to be the one who admits they're not fine. You've just given birth in a drafty upstairs bedroom, surrounded by women whose qualifications include being nearby. As a reward, the midwife hands you a dose of opium, part painkiller, part peace offering, all 10% habit-forming. If the baby cries, more opium. If you cry, still more opium. In Victorian England, every problem comes with a poppy-powered solution. Childbirth has gone precisely as expected. Loudly, painfully, and over several exhausting hours during which no one once considered bathing or opening a window. Your husband, wisely, is not present. He's downstairs drinking brandy and pretending to read a newspaper so as not to faint. The midwife is a stout woman named Agnes, who smells faintly of onions and certainty. She's delivered 15 babies, 1 goat, and possibly a surprise twins situation she still refuses to talk about. She pats your arm with all the tenderness of a blacksmith and tells you, well done. He's got all his bits, comforting. As you clutch your screaming newborn and try to process the sheer volume of bodily fluids currently involved, Agnes reaches into her apron and produces the cure-all, Laudanum. It comes in a bottle with a label that reads, for nerves, H's and moral unrest. You don't ask what's in it. You drink. The pain fades into a foggy, floating feeling. You think you can hear your wallpaper congratulating you. Agnes winks. That'll help you sleep, she says, pouring a few drops into a tiny spoon for the baby too. Yes. the baby. If he's colicky, laudanum. If he's teething, laudanum. If he's crying for no reason, definitely laudanum. It's considered entirely normal to give your infant a mild opiate in the middle of the night, as long as you're also dosing yourself to match. Parenting, Victorian style, is less gentle discipline and more shared sedation. Within days, the opium becomes part of your new routine. Feed the baby. Dose the baby. Feed yourself. Dose yourself. Rock gently. Stare at the fireplace. Occasionally try to remember your own name. Repeat. The ladies who come to visit bring flowers, soft blankets, and unsolicited advice. They suggest you take a stroll, drink more tea, or hum softly to the baby. Then, as they leave, they whisper, "A few drops in warm milk works wonders." You nod, already half asleep, a bottle clutched discreetly in your dressing gown. Medical professionals are no better. Your doctor arrives smelling of tobacco and horse sweat, glances at your glassy eyes and trembling hands, and writes you a fresh prescription. "Mother's nerves," he says solemnly, before reminding you to avoid excitement and strong opinions. You want to scream, but you don't. Screaming isn't ladylike, so you take your dose and write in your diary instead. Felt emotional, took cordial. Baby looked like Winston Churchill in a nightcap. And still, the cycle continues. Some women recover, others quietly spiral. No one talks about it. If a mother becomes too dependent, she's called frail. If she stops showing up to church, people say she's taken to bed. If she disappears entirely, they blame melancholy. The word addiction doesn't exist yet, not in the way it should. But what else are you supposed to do? There's no support group, no therapy, no maternal leave beyond 3 days and a prayer. You're expected to maintain a spotless home, raise morally upright children, and never complain unless it's charming. So you do what's expected. You smile through the fog. You dose the baby. You write thank you notes. You rest, recover, and reapply your corset. Because even in the depths of postpartum despair, the parlor must be dusted, and the neighbors must think everything is fine. And if it takes a little help from the poppy to get you through it all, well, that's not addiction. That's just Victorian motherhood. It's the national pastime. Soldier through tragedy with unflinching composure and a complete lack of visible emotion. How do you keep a straight face at funerals, in-laws' visits, and news of the latest imperial disaster? Easy. You're so blissfully medicated you can't feel your own knees. The stiff upper lip wasn't just a metaphor, it was a side effect. You're expected to endure everything with grace. That's the British way. House fire? Unfortunate. Repressed childhood trauma, best discussed over scones. Entire empire crumbling under the weight of its own hubris. Chin up. This isn't just social custom, it's identity. It's cultural branding. You don't show emotion unless it's admiration for a cleanly trimmed hedge or mild disappointment in the weather. But underneath that calm, composed exterior is a small glass bottle with a cork stopper and a handwritten label, Laudanum, as needed. You don't cry at funerals. You nod. You say he lived a full life, even if he died trying to chase a pig up a chimney. Your voice remains calm, but your pupils are the size of teacups, and you're holding onto the armrest for dear life. Your emotions are securely packed behind a pharmacological wall, and no one, not even your mother-in-law, is getting through it. Your relatives notice, of course. She's always so composed, they whisper admiringly. No one suspects the truth, that your serenity is chemically engineered and timed precisely between the second and third hymn. The British elite practically wrote the handbook on Stoicism, and Opium was its secret co-author. Your daily tragedies, burnt toast, imperial unrest, existential dread, are quietly neutralized by a spoonful of syrup that turns screaming into soft sighing and despair into mild disinterest. You don't have mood swings anymore. You have gentle undulations of personality. Public displays of emotion are discouraged, unless they involve clapping politely after a piano recital. So, what do you do with grief? Rage? Soul-crushing boredom? Easy. You take your medicine, you master the art of blinking slowly and saying, "How dreadful," while feeling absolutely nothing at all. The laudanum helps. You can sit through the reading of a will, a parliamentary scandal, and a marriage proposal in the same afternoon without your expression changing once. Is that resilience? Perhaps. Is it also because you've taken enough opiates to tranquilize a modest horse? Absolutely. When the empire suffers a defeat, say, a far-flung colony rebels, or a general gets eaten by a disgruntled elephant, you keep calm and carry on, mostly because you're already mid-dosage and too tranquilized to panic. You light a lamp, adjust the doilies, and nod solemnly at the newspaper headline, "Troubling Developments in Burma." Then you refill your teacup and forget all about it. The press calls it dignity. Poets call it courage. You call it numb, but you don't say that aloud. Even your children learn early. Emotions are for diaries and nervous breakdowns, not dinner tables. If they feel overwhelmed, they're given a mild tonic. If they're very overwhelmed, they're told to lie down with a compress and reflect on the importance of composure. It's not just cultural, it's medicinal. And while the world sees the British as emotionally invincible, internally you are one sharp hatpin away from collapse. Luckily, the opium smooths the edges. Your jaw stays firm. Your smile stays tight. Your opinions stay tucked away behind the lace curtain of chemical serenity. So the next time someone praises your stiff upper lip, you nod graciously, sip your cordial, and feel absolutely nothing. Because here in Victorian Britain, emotional suppression isn't just tradition, it's medicated. So tonight, as you settle in under your perfectly clean sheets, perhaps with nothing stronger than chamomile tea on your nightstand, spare a thought for the millions of Victorian women who survive daily life with more opium than most modern medicine cabinets could handle. They coped with endless chores, mysterious nervous complaints, impossible expectations, and a society that thought laudanum was basically a food group. It wasn't easy. Their lives were a balancing act between strict etiquette, emotional repression, and the quietly desperate hope that the pharmacy would never run out of soothing syrup. They endured heartbreak, child loss, boredom, grief, and more unsolicited advice than should be legally allowed. And through it all, they somehow managed to keep the tea warm, the fainting couches occupied, and the national supply of patent medicine in constant demand. Was it healthy? Absolutely not. Was it sometimes hilarious in hindsight? Almost always. The truth is, surviving Victorian England wasn't about glamour, romance, or being the heroine of a Gothic novel. It was about making it to bedtime, preferably without collapsing into a pile of petticoats or accidentally inventing a new medical condition. So, as you close your eyes, grateful for the absence of arsenic in your toothpaste and for the fact that your doctor no longer recommends heroin for hiccups, remember, history is mostly a story of stubborn, ingenious, slightly ridiculous people muddling through as best they could. The next time your day feels overwhelming, take comfort in knowing you don't have to do it in a corset, surrounded by decorative antimacassars, and powered by narcotics. Rest easy, knowing your only real prescription tonight is a good night's sleep. And if you wake up tomorrow with a mysterious, nervous complaint, maybe just have some coffee and call it a day. Good night, and sweet dreams.